So I will get started. If you didn't catch my name earlier, my name is Sue Miller. I'm the Director of Programs for the NYG&B, and I'm also a Managing Editor of the New York Family History Research Guide and Gazetteer and the New York Researcher Magazine. Stay tuned for the New York Researcher Magazine. We added a brand new article at the last minute, which delayed the issue just a little bit, but we hope to be able to release that very shortly. So members, stay tuned for the New York Researcher. Okay. This session is navigating the 1950 census. So here's what we'll talk about. We'll do a little bit about what is coming up and a couple of things about why we're excited. One of the things we do want to talk about tonight is how to prepare if you haven't already. And then finally, how you can help. This will also be a, from the National Archives perspective, citizen archivist, indexer, whatever you want to use as a term, all of our help will be needed. Many of you probably participated in the 1940 census indexing. There's some new things for this year, but our help is still going to be needed to correct things because so many of us know the families will see, and if it is written correctly, great. If it's not, or if it wasn't indexed correctly, we'll want to help. So there are ways to help. So what is coming? Well, the United States Census is, at this point in time, under the current rules, they're private for 72 years. So the National Archives will be releasing the 1950 census on April 1st. And the census at this point is held by the National Archives. That's why I say the National Archives will release it. You'll also hear me refer to the National Archives as NARA, because its full name is the National Archives and Records Administration. So again, the enumeration date was April 1st, 1950, so the release date is this Friday. And my understanding is they'll do 12:01 or whatever it is, East Coast time. So for those of you on the West Coast, that might actually be on the 31st of March. Okay, an important point to know is, are we actually getting the original census images? Well, not so much. The census was microfilmed back, I don't know the exact date, back after the census was taken. And they filmed the population schedule pages. There was a housing schedule on the back side. They did not film that housing schedule. They simply totaled all the statistics, and that was not microfilmed. So what we are getting is the microfilm. And unfortunately, for those of us who like original records, the microfilm is going to be as close as we can get to original records. The original pages were actually destroyed after they were microfilmed. So I certainly hope they didn't miss pages, but we don't have the original, we have the microfilm. And that's what the National Archives will release. So another question for you is, why are we excited? Well, this is the largest population in the United States Census that we've seen. There's 152 million people who are enumerated. That's 6.4 million pages that were microfilmed. And that is 6,373 rolls of microfilm that were digitized by the National Archives staff. And they have, the National Archives staff are the one who digitized the microfilm. There are, and this is an important point, there are 9,534 enumeration districts. So the census, when it was taken, was broken down into these enumeration districts, so each enumerator could do a manageable portion. So that is hugely important in any place that had any larger population. Cities especially have numerous enumeration districts. So those are some overall things. There's so much data there for us to tackle. So what can you do to prepare for the 1950 census release? Well, first of all, you can get to know what's in the census. And if you haven't read up on it yet, there's still a little bit of time. You can also go back and read and figure things out after the release and after you find the first few images. but it's good to know what's covered, okay? So learning about what areas in which people were covered by the census could be important. You also want to list the people that you would like to find in the census. I have a fairly short list. I'm probably a little bit unusual in that. My grandparents virtually had no siblings, so there's only one branch of the family where I would be getting a lot of extra people. And in the early stages, like those of us who went through the 1940 census, when that was released, it may be key, if you can't find people immediately, to know and to learn which enumeration district they resided in based on the best information that you have. So those are 4 things that you can do to prepare. Now, there are 2 web pages that I think are going to be quite important for you. Those are in the handout, and hopefully, Noah, you've posted the handout link in the chat a few times. People who come in late to the session will not see the earlier chat, so that's why it gets posted a few times. But it's really easy to find these pages. The National Archives website is that may be a typo, archive.gov. So archive.gov, research census 1950. And Family Search is Family Search /1950 census. So both of those are good places to go. And here is, nope, it looks like I copied the URL right. Archives.gov, research 1950 is, I copied the URL when I did the slide. This is one of the pages that you want to go to, okay? It's got, and when I took this screenshot this morning, the countdown is there, 3 days until the census release. Okay, so you can go to this page and you can see there are lots of links on the side here that you can use for other things too. So that's, you've got the census main page, you've got other things on the side here. Okay, so this is a page you want to go to and to bookmark. Okay. As you go down the page, you've got these really helpful things, like what were the questions that were asked on the 1950 census? The instructions for the enumerators and the public, what our federal government told us about how the enumerators were supposed to conduct the census, and also what the public was supposed to do. Helpfully, there's also these blank census forms. And this is an image of the actual census form, and you can see this kind of a little fold in the actual page on this green ink. So that's fun to have. Then there's also the FAQs, the error finding aids, and there's also some what they call their training and information videos. So this is a really good page to go to. And I'm not going to be able to go through every single thing tonight, but I highly encourage you to go and explore this. Another site you would want to go to is the Family Search 1950 census page. And this has a lot of good information too. And you can see here, there's a sign up for updates, and Family Search will actually, if you have a linked tree, they'll actually push information out to you for what people they think you might be able to find in the census. So this has got a lot of good information on it. And I do want to bring up one thing that's I find quite interesting, and I think it's good for all of us to think about, is when this 1950 census was taken. Think about the historical context for the United States at this point in time. This is the first census after the Second World War. And we know there were many people who came to the US, refugees, people trying to leave Europe before the war, right in the years right after 1938, 39 into 1940, who may not have yet reached the United States, who were here during the war, or who came after. So there was a huge number of people coming in, and the economy was changing tremendously. As the GIs came home, you know, used the GI Bill, got new jobs, our society was changing and expanding quite rapidly at that point. It was also just about the time of the Korean War. So a lot going on in the US at that point in time. Plus, you have more technology coming. I think it's interesting. You do have the invention of the TV. And then just before, in late war, just after the invention of the microwave, you had all this new modern appliances and parts of our society coming forward. So as you think about that and you look at the census questions, that's an interesting point to think about. Now, next question. Who is in the census? Well, we had 48 states in the United States at that point. So you have the residents of the 48 states. And this is an example of what the population distribution was. And this comes from the Census Bureau. And you can go to that URL. And you can probably just search for it very quickly. But population distribution in 1950. So you can see, as you would suspect based on the history of our country, the United States, there's a lot of population density on the East Coast, into the Midwest, into those industrial centers. Also places like the South, Florida and Texas were really booming, and the West Coast. And then in the middle, where you have some of the plains, farming, and mountains, it's less populated. But this gives you an idea of what the 48 states had in population density. And we're always interested in New York, aren't we? Okay, so the other thing that you have is US territories. Alaska and Hawaii were not yet states, but they are included in the census, as is Puerto Rico. The Indian reservations, American Samoa and Guam, that would have been new, the US Panama Canal Zone, the US Virgin Islands, and they also enumerated crews of vessels and people who are overseas. So if you have people in those particular territories or on vessels, we're not going to dig into that tremendously tonight because that's not the majority of the population. But be aware that people could be in those locations if you can't find them in the 48 states. So who's in the census? Well, those baby boomers. How many of us are baby boomers? We're in there. Well, if I wasn't born in 1950, but there are baby boomers. My cousins are in there for the first time. You also have a lot of people who later became celebrities. So it's fun to try and think about who there were. This little screenshot is from the Family Search 1950 census page. And Lucille Ball should be in the census. She was born in Jamestown, New York. So, and lots of other people, Jackie Robinson, those of you who are baseball fans, and Roberto Clemente, and all sorts of other people who become famous over time. And for many of us, we're going to look for family. I'll be looking for my parents and my grandparents. And hopefully lots of you have other cousins and whatnot that you can look for too. So you'll also want to think about what is covered in the census, what questions were asked. This page, and that's also in your handout, you can download this image. I said it was this green page and it kind of has a little bit of a wrinkle in it. This is the census form that was filled out. And I do want to point out something so that you make sure you don't miss this. Where I've got these little yellow circles on the side here. Excuse me. There were a number of lines that were asked to answer additional questions. So if someone that you're looking for was on that sample line, you absolutely want to go and look for those extra questions. Okay. Now, if you want to learn all about this, I sent out an email to those of you who are registered before the weekend about 2 videos that are on the National Archives website, on their YouTube page, actually. This is a very good video, and Claire Kluskens, who does this video, is way more of an expert at everything about the census than I am. So I would highly recommend that you spend the 40 minutes or so, and it could be less if you skip some of it, about the census itself. She works in the National Archives and she knows this backwards and forwards. So I highly recommend you go and spend the time. In the handout, there are some timestamps, so you can look at the main things that you want to. And there is something called the Form P1. When she's discussing the Form P1, that is the population census form, okay? Not other forms. P1 is the population census, and it had the housing on the back, but we don't still have the housing. One of the key points that I picked up from that is oftentimes we're going through and we're looking at sheet number 1, we browse to sheet number 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 and go through, because sometimes we want to read each page in an area to make sure we don't miss someone who could be a neighbor or a relative that's really interesting. Okay, so when the enumerator had to go back to the family, then you need to go and look at the page number, because it jumps from wherever they stopped in their regular enumeration. And when they had to do the callback, then it started on page 71. So if you see a gap in numbers of the pages, there may not be missing pages. It may just be they were able to complete virtually all of it, and then it jumps to 71 for the people they had to go knocking on the door again. Okay, so that's a key point. And that was, if you look at my little timestamp on the bottom, that was around 24, almost 25 minutes where she was discussing that. Another very interesting thing that I said was key to know about is this thing about mapping the census and the enumeration districts. So I'm going to show you an example in 2 cases where you can do some things to find the enumeration districts. The National Archives has also digitized many of the enumeration maps, and they are on the National Archives website. So those are a couple things that you can do to get prepared to know about the census. And this second video, by the way, is only about, it's less than half an hour, so it won't take too much of your time to look at that one too. One of the things I highly recommend that you do for yourself is to make a list of the targets, the people that you want to find. And it will help if you at least make that list by location, because the censuses are organized by the state, then the county, then the town or city. And early searches may not be as accurate, because the initial indexes that we are going to probably see are going to have been created by artificial intelligence. And that doesn't mean that you are going to find everything. We also understand that Ancestry and Family Search will be downloading, as well as other companies, MyHeritage and others, will be downloading the data as soon as it's released, uploading it to their own systems, and Ancestry plans to do its own indexing as well. But for these initial times, and if you can't find somebody, these enumeration districts are really key. What those enumeration districts are is they break it down into a manageable area. So the enumerator could walk around within about 2 weeks and take care of collecting everybody in that area. So, as I said, it may not be up to par, but we're going to try and use them as best we can. All right, let me go on and talk about finding enumeration districts. One of the great websites for finding this is Steve Morse's One Step. Some of you may have used those before. And because of the population growth, the enumeration districts had to get smaller and smaller in a lot of places. That may not be true everywhere, but especially in growing cities, they had to break the enumeration districts into smaller and smaller and smaller chunks. So if you had an enumeration district from a previous census, you may not be able to rely on that, even if the people lived at the same address. It'll change for a lot of people. It might stay the same for some. So the key is go and check each one. So I'm going to go through a quick example here of how to use this. Here I've selected New York. Then I selected Queens County. And again, because Queens is a county and all the towns are now gone, it's a borough, there's only one city or town within Queens County, and that's Queens. And I didn't actually try the other, but for the most part, they're always going to be that. The next thing you're going to want to do is enter the house number and the street number. If you don't know it, you get this huge long list. So if you don't have it, you've got a lot of enumeration districts to go through in Queens. And let me show you now, if I add a house number, I started, I think, with 89th. And then I added the house number. I still have a lot of enumeration districts. So it didn't immediately know which one I should go to. So you can reduce the number by adding these cross streets and back streets. And that's key in a city. So once I add, this was just south of Forest Park. So that one of the cross streets nearby is Park Lane South. And if they were on 89th Street, 85th Road goes through the middle. So I put that one in. And then I get down to 2. And then when I add the back street, they were on 89th Street. So 88th Street was the one behind them. Then I get down to just one enumeration district. So that's the goal, is getting down to this level, as many of these cross streets and whatnot as you can find, in order to get the one enumeration district I need for the Miller family. Okay, and you will get, messages like this. It'll be available for April 21st, 2022. It sounds like Steve Morse's site is planning to link to the census when they're able to, but everybody's going to be doing a lot right away. So if you're trying to do this on the 1st and 2nd of April, you may have to be a little patient. There's so much data out there. Now, one of the other things I do want to talk to you about is, what do you do when you find the people you're looking for? Okay. Now, if you've been good and you've made a list of some of the people that you want to find for your various families, hopefully you've got a list, something like this, and what the expected place is. And the Miller family, they were in Woodhaven, Queens. That's why I was looking at that enumeration district. Once you do that, these are the types of things that you would want to be doing. You want to copy the URL once you find it into your working document. It can also be helpful if you used a website that breaks it down in waypoints. Waypoints would be the United States 1950 census would be the top level. The next waypoint would be to go to New York. The next waypoint would be go to Queens County. The next waypoint would be to go to enumeration district, what was it, 41217 or whatever it was, to that enumeration district. And then potentially image 5 out of 25. Or if your family's like mine, they're on page 29 out of 30. So having those waypoints is another good way to do it, so that if you lose the URL somehow, or somehow the URL changes, you can work your way down from the top level to the state level, to the county level, to the enumeration district level, going all the way down as much as you need to hone in on the people that you're looking for. It's always good to create a citation. I know many of us will be so excited we don't want to do that immediately, but it's always good to do those. Find your way back, and that way you don't have a lot of them to do later. And finally, make sure you note any correction needed. The ways that we can help, that I'll talk about in a few minutes, might not be ready on day one. So it's always helpful to have a list of things that you could help with corrections later. Now, that keeping track, that may be something that you will have to figure out what your best system is. My personal thing, I tend to like Word a little bit more than Excel. That's just the way my mind works. So here's my Miller listings that I'm going to look for my grandfather. And you saw me looking for Queens, and I found that enumeration district 41-217. And I'm not going to look just for my family. I'm going to look for all his boyhood friends that we used to spend New Year's Eve with over the years. So I found most of those in the 1940 census. I'm going to be looking for them in the 1950 census as well. I've got a placeholder in my list for the URL from the NARA website. I've given myself a placeholder here if I'm using Ancestry or Family Search or MyHeritage. If there are waypoints that I just spoke about, New York, Queens, enumeration district. Maybe they'll have one that says Woodhaven because they know that's the neighborhood. Maybe it'll just be the enumeration district. It all depends on how those sites are going to be configured, and I'll want to eventually fill in this waypoint. I've created this possible citation until I have the page that I'm going to use. I can't fill this in entirely. But, I've filled in what my placeholders might be, including the census, Queens County, New York, the population schedule, or maybe it's going to be Form P1, Woodhaven and the enumeration district. I'm guessing there that that's how it might be organized. The sheet number, the line number, and household of, William Henry Miller. That's the old way of doing it. I'll probably, instead of citing the household of William Miller, I'll probably cite each person separately with their own citation. And then the URL and when I accessed it. I'm really being hopeful here that I'm going to find them on day one on April 1st. So completing some sort of a worksheet, a working document like this will be helpful to you so that when you start looking, you'll be able to fill in things and you won't forget to get that URL for each one of them. Okay, I said I would talk briefly about how you can help. And I mentioned that the National Archives is going to try and create this artificially created AI index. That Ancestry will be doing the same thing. It sounds very much like Family Search is working with Ancestry on that. What I understand, both Ancestry and Family Search and the National Archives, everybody wants you to put in corrections into whatever their system will be. So we may not know that on day one, but the indexes will need these updates. So keep a list of the corrections that you think need to be made and watch for announcements. And the National Archives is quite clear about this. They tell us that, and that's right on that 1950 census page, that they're doing this artificial intelligence, OCR, optical character recognition, so that they can try and get all the handwritten names into an index. But again, all of us will have to help, and hopefully it'll go a lot faster than the 1940 census did. And that went faster than everybody's predictions too. Now, I haven't, and I know there's lots of questions in the Q&A too. I haven't specifically shown you about Ancestry, but I do not want to leave them out. So many of us use them. We do have our Ancestry subscriptions. This has recently popped up on the Ancestry page, and they're free access. And if you want to know when areas are indexed, you can select those states and territories, and they're telling us that they will be able to notify us about that. So when I did that, I got the little thank you for registering. Also on the Ancestry site, they have people that they think I will be able to find, and they're feeding me possible locations. Well, I think these are probably actually not right. These are the locations where these my grandparents were later in time, but not actually in the 1950 census. So they also, though, on Ancestry have created, sorry, let me go back one second, where you see that Explore Maps in the yellow box up there. You come to this page where you can find out about enumeration districts that Ancestry has put on. So you can click on those circles and zoom in to try and find things, or you can add the location. So as you go in and we zoom into New York, there are an awful lot of enumeration districts all across the state. So there's clearly an awful lot more downstate here than there are in some of the upstate areas because of the size of the population. Nonetheless, you'll want to think about those enumeration districts in case you need them. Again, what I did is I went in and I used the Woodhaven, which is that area of Queens. And what I had to do is I ended up zooming in on the map. To me, that worked much better. I know that where they were living, this is Forest Park here, and then some of the cemeteries are right down here that many of us are familiar with the Evergreens on the end, and Cypress Hills and Mount Hebron and all those other cemeteries that are in there. They lived right around in this area. So when I zoomed in on this, I was able to pinpoint, and the pin is not exactly in the spot where they lived, but you can zoom in using this ancestry mapping as well. So if this is an easier way to use this rather than doing the streets and the back streets, another way to find some of those enumeration districts. So what do you need to do? Review those websites I was telling you about, okay? Prepare your list. I didn't put it on here, but don't forget to watch those videos from the National Archives. You know, they are the experts. They've been living with this data for longer than we have been. We're just getting it released to us on Friday. Find those enumeration districts in case you need them. Get a good night's sleep on Wednesday in case you're going to be up at midnight on Friday morning. And those on the West Coast have a little bit easier. And then midnight East Coast time, we should be able to go to the NARA website and take a look at the first images. So with that, I felt like I gave you an awful lot there. So let me see if we can go to some questions. There's a question behind the development of the 72-year law. The history behind the 72-year law, I don't know that off the top of my head. I wouldn't doubt that if you look on the NARA website, you would be able to find that. So I think, you know, currently that is the law. It's not always been the law under my understanding, but it is currently, I don't hear anything about anybody changing that. So, okay, will I be able to find myself easily? And the person asking the question was born in 1937. I would hope you will be able to, but again, the indexes that we're going to have effectively on day one will have been created by the National Archives, which what they called on that slide, AIOCR, Artificial Intelligence Optical Character Recognition. So if that is not reading names well, then you won't necessarily be able to find yourself by searching a name. My understanding, they're going to have a name search right away on the NARA website. As far as Ancestry and Family Search, they will need to, and MyHeritage and anyone else who's downloading this data, they need to first, once the release happens, they're not getting it in advance. Once the release happens, they need to download all the data and then upload it to their sites. I would imagine there's been some pretty busy teams at all the major genealogy sites, you know, looking for all of that and trying to figure out in advance how they'll do that, how quickly it will be on sites other than NARA. I think we're just going to have to wait and see. So, okay, let's see if I can find the next question here. Annette is asking, did the ED numbers change from 1940 to 1950 in New York City? Annette, I have not done a scientific study, but I certainly think most of them will. The population was expanding rapidly, and they needed to make more and more and more enumeration districts. So I would highly recommend for any city, not just New York City and not just cities and populated areas in New York State, but use those tools provided. That Steve Morse One Step is very good for that method, and it's a little more, I know this, I can type in the street names. The Ancestry was easier to use on a mapping situation. And the National Archives website right now has a lot of enumeration district maps and descriptions on their website. Stanton, hi Stanton. Stanton is a longtime volunteer at the NYG&B. Is asking, can you find, yes, enumeration districts before the release date? Absolutely. When I logged into Ancestry recently, that little way to map came up. I put a URL that worked for me in the handout. Hopefully that will work for all of you. It came up on my main Ancestry page. I had to scroll down a little bit, but if you have a subscription to Ancestry, go in and use that. The Steve Morse One Step site is open to everyone, and I gave you the link in the handout to that. So absolutely go find those enumeration districts before the release on April 1st. And the National Archives site also has those enumeration district maps and descriptions of the enumeration districts. Okay, so let's see. Paul is asking, do you recommend jumping in right away to find people as soon as possible, or would it be more prudent and efficient to wait a little while? Well, Paul, yes, that's a time equation that we will all have to figure out for ourselves. I'm prepared to jump in on April 1st and go find at least my initial limited list. And that will also allow me to test the indexes to see how well they work. If I'm finding that the indexing that's initially been done is not very good, I might put off trying to find some of those cousins from the Roadfield family, which is a little bit harder name to find if it gets mangled. So everyone's going to make their own decision. And we know we genealogists like to jump on things as quickly as possible when information comes out. But again, I highly recommend you keep yourself a little bit organized. I know it's so hard when that shiny apple is out there to simply grab it without doing the other things, but having your list, copying the URLs, trying to write a citation, even if your citation isn't perfect, any citation is better than none. And if you have either one that's pre-copied, that you can copy and paste to make sure that you fill in as much data as you can, that will help you out in the long run. Okay, let me see. Okay, browsing by place. What I mean by that is, and I don't know, I have not seen the National Archives website, okay? So I don't know exactly how the National Archives website will work. I can't imagine they wouldn't have an ability, rather than searching the entire United States at once, that I couldn't go and search just either New York State or a smaller area within New York State. Then once I find that smaller area broken down, hopefully down to that enumeration district that I found, and I'm going to start to memorize this. I think it was, the last numbers were 1217, 41, 12, 17. If I can find all the images for that enumeration district, what I mean by browse by place is I can go page by page through that enumeration district and see if I can find my people. And again, because I know some of the people who lived in that neighborhood and grew up in that neighborhood, I can probably find those friends if I browse that page by page. Not all of them, because that enumeration district is going to be smaller. So if they lived 2 blocks over, they might be in another enumeration district. But that's what I mean by browsing by place, looking page by page and reading all the names throughout an area. Okay. Paul is saying some of the indexing is more complete. Let me see, Paul, was there a follow-up on that? I'm not sure I quite understand if that was a question or just a comment. Okay, I'm not seeing that. Okay, sorry, Paul, I'm going to skip on. If you want to put another question in, we'll see if we have time to get to it. We are already, I think, running past time, but that's okay. We'll keep going. And Barbara's saying Ancestry just put up on the homepage a way to find enumeration districts. Just type the address and a map comes up. Wow, she tried it today and found 5 in about 20 minutes. It's super easy and it's new. Thank you, Barbara. I obviously had done mine a little bit earlier than you did yours. So Ancestry is bringing things online as we speak. And I think that's going to be the case. I think we're going to want to keep looking at these as we go through the week. Mary Ellen asking, were the missed households added on page 70 plus? That was, I guess, the 1940 census and or earlier ones. Mary Ellen, to answer that question, it's not a question I've looked at in quite some time. I think you'd have to go back to the instructions for the enumerators. The National Archives in their census pages has the instructions to enumerators going back as far as they have them available for the printed instructions to enumerators. So 1940 and earlier, when you have questions like that, go back to those instructions for enumerators. I don't remember a big skip like that, but it's been a while since I browsed the 1940 and earlier census page by page by page. Okay. John is saying the Great Kamar, the magician from the Letterman show, is a relative and will appear. It will be fun to see him. John, I hope you find him right away. That's great. It's so fun that we're going to find all these different people. Thanks for sharing that. Michelle is saying, are the first couple of days likely to produce crashes on the hosting site? Is it a good strategy to wait 4 to 5 days? I think we are going to have to wait and see. Clearly, the major genealogy sites are aware of the potential traffic load that we as genealogists can generate when we get excited about things. I hope the National Archives is as well. We had a recent experience with the New York City release of the 9 million public digitized records, and their site was crashing and almost immediately. They did get it up and running fairly quickly. I was pleased to see that we didn't have quite so many hang times and things. I think you can go in and test it. If it seems to be crashing, maybe you want to do something else. Okay, we'll all have to figure that out when it goes live. Okay, when you say find people, did you mean when you find the ED number or the people in the census? That initial website from NARA is supposed to have some sort of that artificial intelligence OCR indexing function. So that's when you find people, if you either find them through the name search, or if you go through and find them by searching and browsing in an enumeration district, going page by page. No matter what, when you find the people that you're researching, when you find them, that's where I was saying it's a good practice to go and collect some data, like the URL, like those waypoints, and to try to write a citation. Okay, it may not be a perfect citation, but work on it as best you can. So it's easy to go grab an apple, and then you have a bushel and you can't take care of everything, and you end up having to make applesauce or cider and go back and get the apples off the tree again if you want a nice, crisp, clean apple. So if you can manage to go slowly and complete those steps about creating the URL in your work papers, whatever those are, in your research notes, your research log, in your document, add it to your tree, wherever you're doing that, and then also do the waypoints and write your citation. Okay. Let's see. Okay, Helen was looking. Okay, you've got what you need, Helen. Very good. I know we've still got quite a few questions. I want to try and get to a few more before we run out of time here. Sarah was asking, will the images be on Ancestry and Family Search at midnight as well? I don't think they'll be on at midnight because they are getting the same release as all the rest of us. They are not getting the images in advance. So their teams will be downloading data off the site. And actually, that's a good capacity thought. Maybe we don't want to go on at midnight so that Ancestry and Family Search and the people who are grabbing, and MyHeritage and others who are going to grab large chunks of data, we may find if they're grabbing and using the site, it might be a little difficult at midnight. So, but they will have to download the data first, then upload it onto their own websites. So in the 1940 census, I think the strategy for them was to do Delaware and Rhode Island pretty much first, because those are smaller states, so they could accomplish that quite quickly. I don't know whether that will be the way it goes this time, or whether it'll just be all simultaneous if they have enough people around the world able to help and download. So it'll be a good question. We may have to just live through it and see. That's why I say get a good night's sleep on Wednesday. Okay, and you're asking what the difference in the terms of AI versus OCR. They're using that term, NARA, the National Archives is using that term together, AI/OCR, artificial intelligence of optical character recognition. So this is handwriting. The 1950 census, I didn't say this, the 1950 census is not typed. People hand wrote the forms. Okay, so it's handwriting. A little more difficult to do OCR. Pat's saying I just kind of answered that question. You know, I think it's going to be interesting to see how quickly the commercial sites and large websites, not-for-profit website, will be able to get this up and running. It's going to be an experience. We're just going to have to figure that out when we go to look. Okay, I think we're almost through our questions here. Okay, the next two questions are both about the military. Were they counted at their homes or where they were stationed in the US? Off the top of my head, I don't remember the answer to that. I'm guessing it is on the NARA website, on that 1950 census page for NARA. I do recall that supposedly people who were at college, living at college, not day for college, would be enumerated at their college. So that is a good test question, and I'm going to find that out with my mother because she was in college. So will she be enumerated with the family in Manhasset with her parents and her sister, or will she be enumerated in New London, Connecticut at the college campus? That's one of my questions for the 1950 census that I will find out hopefully this weekend. All right, I think we've gotten to the end of the questions and we're just a minute or two before 8 o'clock, which is great. So thank you, everyone. I'm so glad you joined us here. We're going to learn an awful lot about this. It may be that over the next few weeks, when we learn a bit more, we can do an office hours style presentation. We did some office hours last week and one the week before when the New York City records were released. Those are informal, not a scripted presentation, but kind of just doing things as we go along and answering questions. So I don't see any more questions coming in. So I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you learned from it. And hey, good luck, everybody. I'll probably be on there with you in those early hours, seeing if I can find my family and others and learn more about the 1950 census. So good night, everyone. Thanks for joining us.